Hey everyone, welcome back to Dollar Triage, another episode where we discuss personal finance matters for first responders and healthcare workers. The world just broke, and we haven't noticed it yet. We haven't quite felt it yet, but things are about to get really ugly. Now, I'm not really a conspiracy theorist. I don't know if I can even say that on YouTube, but I'm not a tinfoil hat kind of guy. I'm a data-driven kind of guy. I like to see facts, but I also like to pay attention to the signs around me. I'm going to present to you my evidence for the statement that the world has broken and that we're about to all be in a world of hurt. And because I'm not just Chicken Little and the sky's falling, I have some tips and solutions for you at the end that you might start looking at. There are certainly going to be some things that I'm doing. So, you ever been driving down the highway in maybe your old POS car years ago, or perhaps recently, but if that's the case, I'm sorry, and you're cruising down the highway minding your own business, and all of a sudden the engine cuts out and your dashboard lights up with the check engine light and a bunch of other lights, and you're just kind of coasting going, what the hell just happened? I'm pretty sure, like, economically, that's where we're at. I think Russia invading Ukraine was the engine cutting out. Maybe you could even say that wasn't quite the coup d'etat, wasn't quite the end, but the sanctions put on Russia by the US are definitely the engine cutting out. And I'm not saying that's not necessary. It was necessary, but the problem with sanctions is that they're a two-way street because we're a connected global economy. Perhaps I should say we were a connected global economy, but it's not just me saying this. We're going to talk about food shortages, and this is an article headline from Yahoo Finance and Bloomberg saying Biden says to expect real food shortages due to the Ukraine war. And I'm not going to read you the article or anything, but it's going to serve as perhaps an example that this is not just my crazy idea. The President of the United States of America is saying the world is going to experience food shortages. The problem with the world experiencing food shortages is that we are in fact part of the world. We like to have this American exceptionalism saying, oh, we're self-sufficient. Nothing else will affect us except what we do, but that's not quite true at all. Even a little bit, actually. Here's another analogy for you. Imagine that you have 6 producers of food that stock your grocery store. Hypothetical, just an example. But imagine there's 6 guys that come in with various products and stock your grocery store every week. And one month, say in February, 2 of them get into a fight. One of those producers gets knocked out cold, and the other producer is an asshole, so you kick him out of the store and ban him forever. What that results in are the other remaining 4 producers needing to make up for the supply deficit from the other 2 that have been taken out. That's essentially what we're looking at with the world food supply and some other supplies too. Russia and Ukraine, it turns out, are massive exporters of wheat. Wheat prices have been going through the roof because Ukraine and Russia, I believe globally, each produce, in aggregate total produce about 30% of the wheat the world uses. And when you take out 30% of the world's wheat supply, there is going to be more supply shortages. It doesn't matter where you're at. If you imagine a global market, kind of like with oil that we talked about earlier, if you're missing 30% of your world supply, that means people are going to have to supplement. So places where you wouldn't normally be buying wheat from, you're suddenly going to have to buy wheat from. So this means there's a lot less wheat for everybody. The supply problem with wheat can come in 2 forms. Either there can be no wheat, which is going to be a problem for sure because Ukraine's planting season is coming up soon, and they're not going to be able to plant because they're too busy, fighting a war. So we're going to be missing the physical supply, but you can also have something be so expensive you can't afford it, so it doesn't matter if it's there on the shelf or not. The problem is that wheat's price has just come up and gone off the charts. It's had a little bit of a pullback, but it's still, as you can see here, very, very expensive compared to the last year, at least. Actually, 2 years. It's not just bread, though. Wheat makes up a large portion of livestock feed. So when livestock feed goes up in price, that means your meat price goes up. And when there's livestock and filler, and so, I mean, if you think about everything that uses wheat, flour, everything that uses flour, there's a ton of stuff that this goes into that this is going to just blow up the price with. And if you add on to that the fact that there is going to be a physical supply problem, then you can see clearly that the wheat price is not going to come back down and stabilize anytime soon. In fact, it's probably going to keep going up. It's not just wheat, though. It's everything. If you want a suitable replacement for wheat, you can look at soybeans, but soybeans are more expensive than they've been in years. You can see they're way higher than they had been. How about corn? Nope. Corn's also the most expensive it's been in years and years. And natural gas is used for creating fertilizer. Natural gas is the most expensive it's been for years as well. So all of these things can kind of coming together are going to increase not just the cost of food directly, but also the cost of producing other food and the derivatives that those things create, like fertilizer we'll talk about here soon. So the cost of everything is skyrocketing because of this war and because of these sanctions, because we're not going to be buying wheat and resources from Russia. We're not going to be buying natural gas from Russia. Most places won't be. The foreign actors that are going to be either hostile to us or at least not friendly, places like Iran, China, India now, these places will be making deals in gold probably with Russia for these items, but the rest of Europe and America, and I don't know what countries of South America or Africa have planned, but there's going to be a lot of places that are not going to have access to this food supply because Russia and China and India and Iran, they're going to be buying it all up and utilizing it. And if they have extra, they sure won't be selling it to us because we won't be buying it. If that wasn't quite enough, there is a huge bird flu outbreak right now. Right now it's contained just to birds, so far as I know. There's no human-to-human transmission, but there's bird-to-human transmission, which is necessitating the culling of large populations of birds, unfortunately. So I don't know if you've heard about this, but this bird flu is spreading like wildfire. It started in China, it went through the Middle East and Europe, and it arrived in America in probably February, I think. And as you can see from this headline, the avian influenza rate doubled over March, and it just continues to grow. The problem with this is that you have to kill the birds so they stop spreading it. Otherwise, they're going to die on their own, first of all, and they have a much higher chance of spreading it from their animal reservoir to a human population that can sustain spread, and then we have the 1918 flu all over again. I can't find a precise count of how many birds have been killed across Europe and China and America, but everywhere I turn, there are independent or regional, I suppose, regional areas that show they're killing millions and millions of chickens specifically, and turkeys also. But not just any chickens, food chickens and egg-laying chickens. This is an example from Iowa, 5.3 million chickens killed in Iowa. Their latest count, as of the 18th anyway, was about 12.6 million chickens in 8 states have been killed or will be killed soon. Here's an example. 2.75 million chickens in Wisconsin had to be euthanized. The Wisconsin culls bring 6.7 million commercially raised chickens and turkeys killed nationwide, according to their estimates. So we're in millions and millions of chickens and egg-laying chickens have been killed and will be killed, and it's doubled this month. So we are likely to see that continue. Again, if you're thinking like, oh, well, the price of chicken's going up and the price of eggs are going up, but that's fine, I don't eat chicken or eggs, then that's great. But again, you have to consider the knock-on effects. If you're not strictly vegan, then your prices are going to go up for all of these things. So anything with an emulsifier, mayonnaise, a lot of spreads, dressings, sauces, soups, mousse, puddings, chocolate, all these things, cookies, pastries, Prices are going up. Baby food, instant drinks, baking powders, pasta, cheese, beer, all sorts of things are made with eggs as various ingredients. Now, the problem, if you are a vegan, is that if non-vegans are having to turn to eat your vegan food, there's less vegan food for you to eat. So you might think this is a victory if you're a vegan, and it does highlight some of the reasons why being a vegan can be advantageous. However, there's going to be a lot of hungry people who are coming for your veggies, and that's going to create a veggie shortage just like everything else. Now, I don't know if you're local to the Pacific Northwest, but where I am, in the Pacific Northwest, where we grow a ton of potatoes and a ton of onions, our crop this year of potatoes and onions is garbage. I have never seen such small, crappy, rotten onions and potatoes in my life. A lot of this is because of the drought we've been having. A lot of this is also because of transportation and supply chain problems. And a lot of this is because a lot of the onions and potatoes we produce go into things like fast food, so we don't see them at the grocery store. McDonald's, for example, has very specific specifications for the potatoes they use to make into their French fries, and they make a ton of French fries, so they are a huge consumer of potatoes. So I'm not seeing those potatoes that I would have because McDonald's is consuming them. So this is kind of an example of the knock-on effects, where one thing starts this domino chain of shortages into categories we would have never thought of. Now, in addition to wheat, another thing that Russia and Ukraine collectively export is a lot of fertilizers. A big portion of this is because Russia has a massive natural gas reserve, and natural gas goes into a lot of fertilizer production. Now, Russia exports a ton of fertilizer. Russia is, in fact, the largest exporter of fertilizers in the world, and they also, like I said, export a lot of natural gas. Now, fertilizers, the prices of fertilizers have doubled over the last 18 months, as noted here in this particular article. So if you're thinking again that corn might be a good example for livestock feed as opposed to wheat, well, it turns out Brazil is one of the world's largest corn exporters, and Brazil relies heavily on imports of nitrogen fertilizer from Russia. So if Russia is not willing or able to export this to Brazil, Brazil is not going to be able to export that corn, and then their large food source for both humans and animals is off the table. So this is kind of a compounding effect. It's not just that Russia's deleting, 20% of natural gas and 20% of oil and 20% of wheat from the world market. These products are used to create many, many, many more products from other places. So we're really losing a lot of production across the world in crops, fertilizers, diesel fuel additive like urea, natural gas, all this food. Oh boy, ammonia, nitrogen, so much of this is just being cut in supply. Here's a chart for your viewing pleasure of the monthly average fertilizer prices from 2011 to 2021. And you can see the anhydrous ammonia has a massive spike, and the urea and liquid nitrogen are also spiking. Here's another problem. Let's keep going down this compounding effect chain. The operating benchmark for farm profit margin, I should say, is on average 11.3%. This is a study from Purdue University studying agriculture and looking at farms and analyzing the financials. And they came out with the fact that 11.3% is the average operating margin, profit margin for a farm. I have an article here that says fertilizer expenses in North Dakota are expected to reduce net profit per acre by 20%. So just the cost of fertilizer in North Dakota is removing more than twice the profit margin, actually a little bit less than twice the profit margin off the table. So any fertilizer or any field, any farmer who needs the fertilizer for their crops, the fertilizer by itself is so expensive, it's eating their profit margin in its entirety and then some. What this translates to for us is that food prices have jumped 20% year over year, and it's only going to get worse. This is already from this year to last year. what this is going to look like a year from now, this number is likely to be quite a bit higher. The problem with this chain of events is that not only are the production costs of food getting considerably more expensive, and not only is the supply of the physical goods getting considerably more scarce, they are scarce enough and more expensive enough that there's significant risk that many farms in America can go out of business. And not just America, but across the world, more so across the world for sure. But there is a very small profit margin to farms as it is. So when we start increasing the cost of urea for diesel motors, the cost of diesel fuel itself, and the cost of feed for livestock, and the lack of chickens and chicken products with eggs and egg products, we're facing a massive supply problem and price shock that's not here yet. So I don't think we've even seen just anything past the first chapter in food inflation that we're going to experience. Now, this is a problem because Americans had savings. If you were paying attention to financial news over the last year or two, you've probably heard that Americans have record amounts of savings, which it was true when we had the stimulus coming through. And this first spike here, you can see 33% for a personal savings rate, and then another spike with each stimulus that came through. And without that stimulus, that personal savings rate is plunging down to 6.4%, which is just about as low as it can go, or has gone over the last 10 years. So American savings are the lowest they've been in 10 years, or just about. Opposite metric, this is the credit card and other resolving debt chart from the Federal Reserve, the St. Louis Federal Reserve. This is showing over the last year, Americans' credit card and consumer and revolving debt has increased, what is that, $835 billion from the low of $741 billion. So we've increased our debt collectively $100 billion just about over the last year. So our credit cards and our revolving credit, these credit lines are getting maxed out. Our savings are at all-time lows. So this tells you the U.S. consumer is stretched about as thin as they can be with the current situation, with gas prices what they are, with food prices what they are now. I know my family is certainly feeling it. We're not doing much besides grocery shopping and paying for gas, and that's about it. Anything else extra, it goes into savings or investing, because holy crap, we don't have much extra anymore. So we're already maxed out. So here's a kicker. Let me throw a little bit of gasoline on the fire here. With rising import costs for everything and rising production costs for everything, and food inflation about to go off the charts, turns out the U.S. is facing the worst drought it's had in a very long time. And I don't particularly care to go through the details of this article because, suffice it to say, we've had very poor crop harvests this last year, and it looks like this year is going to be as bad, if not worse. And let's not forget that the supply chain problems that we've been having over the last year, 2 years, the supply chain problems have not been fixed. They continue. So even if we could import everything we needed and grow everything we needed, we still couldn't move it around the country efficiently. So what's happening instead is that we can't import what we need. It's too expensive, and even if we could, there's no profit, so the farms could go out of business, if they can even farm, because our drought is so bad, they may not be able to even grow anything, even if they wanted to, even if they could afford it. Holy crap. Here's a summary of what this means. I think that the world is likely to see the beginning of the worst food shortages we've ever seen in our lifetimes. I'm talking not seen this bad since like the Dust Bowl years of the Great Depression. Food will either become so expensive people can't afford it and they'll go hungry, or even if they can't afford it, there may not be enough food for everyone. Now, this will definitely be worse in other parts of the world. America will have it better than most, but we're still not going to have it good. I suspect that food inflation is going to be tagging new record highs for the next year, if not multiple years, because of all of this that we've talked about. Discretionary spending is tapped. Americans have record low savings, record high credit card debt, and we can't afford much more than what's already happening. When we can't afford to do anything else besides pay for groceries and gas, a lot of other things start losing revenue. Luxury items, electronics, things that might not seem quite as important when you just need gas to go to work and food to eat. And it's a negative feedback loop, because when enough people can only afford groceries and gas and nothing else, then all of these other goods and services that are on the periphery of that go out of business. And then those people can't afford anything besides gas or food. And so more businesses go out of business. And so what you have is a depression. And that's exactly what we're heading for, unless something changes really, really drastically and very soon. This is going to potentially be terrifying to live through. And that's not hyperbole. That's what I genuinely believe. So my personal predictions, I'm going to put myself out there on the record and say, here are things that I anticipate. And we'll see if I'm right or wrong. We'll leave this video up and you can go back and fact check me. I expect that we will eventually be seeing stimulus in the forms of expanded food stamps. I think they're going to expand the food stamp program so that most people can get food stamps now. They're going to probably raise the income limits quite a bit. And we're probably also going to see a gas stimulus if the Democrats get their way. I expect that in the midterm elections, we're going to see some talk about food and gas stimulus. They may cancel student loans, and I expect for the 2024 election, I honestly, things change so fast and so much. Who knows what that's going to look like? But if things keep going, then they're going to be talking a lot about stimulus. They'll probably have already done stimulus by the time that rolls around. In places suffering from food security currently, we're going to see famine, uprisings, revolts, and unrest. Places that are impoverished countries that already have starvation are going to just be decimated, unfortunately. It's going to be an absolute tragedy. In places that are wealthy and have arguably too much food, like America, we're going to start seeing food insecurity on levels that we would associate with poorer countries. There's going to be a lot of poor Americans who cannot afford to eat right now. And that number is only going to keep growing unless, again, something changes. Because that's going to happen so severely, I think we're going to see like a new Occupy Wall Street movement. I think that we're going to see, you and me eating beans and rice and having like a $100 steak per plate as, the birthday luxury that you do like once a year. And I expect that we're going to see a lot of Congress people and U.S. government officials and a lot of the rich social elites eating like they've never skipped a beat. Like it's not any sort of burden or problem for them, because honestly, it's a percentage issue. If your food costs go up, say $200, that could very well be 20% of your food budget increasing. But if you're rich and your food costs go up $200, it's like, I don't know, 0.1%. You'll never even notice that the frickin' butler's spending more on the food to bring home to your head chef who cooks for you. Like, you'll never notice that. So I think we're going to see a large widening of the wealth gap. We're going to see a lot of division, a lot of social unrest here in the States. Okay, some of the things you can do to prepare and mitigate this. Huge number one. My biggest, strongest, by far recommendation is to kill high-interest consumer debt. Kill it like it's cancer, because it will kill you if you don't. I'm talking credit cards, payday loans, lines of credit on things like tires or beds and furniture or electronics. Anything that has an interest rate higher than the rate of inflation, so any interest rate higher than 7% or 8% right now, you must eliminate that. That's going to be your number one priority, because interest rates are going up. Now, consumer credit rates are not a direct function of the Federal Reserve raising interest rates, but what happens is that as the Federal Reserve does raise interest rates historically, I think just about every single time they've done that, they've triggered a recession. When you're in a recession, that means people are going out of business and people are losing jobs and people are not able to pay on their lines of credit. That makes it more risky for banks to have credit lines extended to you and me. And so the lines of credit that are extended are going to get more expensive. The interest rates will go up because the banks will perceive it as more risky to loan to us. So your interest rates are going to go way up, way past what the Fed is signaling in raising rates, because the banks are not going to like the level of risk they see in credit default and people declaring bankruptcy. So that's number one. Kill your credit cards, kill your debt. Number two, just buy a little extra food on your grocery trips. It's almost a sure thing at this point that your next grocery trip is going to cost more, and the items you're looking for may not even be there at all. So you don't have to go panic shopping and fill like 3 shopping carts worth of toilet paper. I'm not saying to do that. But if you normally buy, 2 loaves of bread, grab 3 and stick 1 in the freezer. Or if you buy, 3 cans of corn, grab 6 cans of corn. Just kind of stock up on things that are shelf stable or freezable that you're going to eat. And so if I'm wrong about all this, the worst thing that happens is you still have food to eat. But buying extra and stashing it is going to be probably in our favor, probably strongly in our favor. If you want to get a little bit more extreme with it, you can buy an extra freezer, like a drop freezer, deep freezer, or just an actual regular freezer to stick out in the garage. And then you can store meat and other freezable items and have extra storage for extra frozen food. And having more food on hand is going to be important. Now, if you want to take that a step further, you can do the really, really cheap thing right now, which is buying packets of seeds. If the cost of vegetables and produce at the store is not to your liking, and you don't mind putting up a little bit of an investment, you can definitely start growing some of your own. And now this is a Home Depot page I wanted to see. This is just a random location, and it's not where I live, but this is a selection of seeds that you can see may not actually be available. There are some, but a lot of these look like they are out of stock. They're cheap, and so if you can find a way to grow these in your apartment, in your house, in your yard, doesn't matter how big or small, if you start growing some food, that's food you're not going to have to pay for at the grocery store. It'll be fresher, it'll be healthier. And yeah, it's a little bit more of a pain in the butt, but honestly, this is likely to be a huge money-saving skill for anyone with the space and the time and the ability to dedicate their resources to. It's a very, very cost-efficient thing to do. And it's going to be very, very important if these things stop showing up at the grocery store. As it is, it seems like we may not be able to get a lot of these seeds, so I would check that out and maybe plan on stashing some just in case. You can have fresh vegetables and you can eat fresh vegetables from your garden. That's fantastic. You can can vegetables as well. And I highly recommend canning vegetables. You can can vegetables you make. That's probably the best option at all. But you can also just go to the grocery store and buy vegetables that are in season and on sale and then can them and then have it on the shelf for a rainy day. Now, there's a lot to canning that's its own rabbit hole. The importance of canning right, like you don't want botulism. That's pretty uncomfortable. Probably, definitely don't want botulism. So you can look at pressure canners. It looks like Home Depot has a pressure canner for a 150. I would strongly suggest, if you're interested in this, doing it soon, because it's not just me thinking about this. There's going to be a lot of people looking into home canning and growing their own vegetables and canning their vegetables, because that's really the most cost efficient and self-sustaining thing to do. That is my take on why the world is broken, and we haven't even begun to feel it yet. Things are going to get crazy scary. And I don't mean to be all doom and gloom, but if you're aware of this, if you understand what's happening and can get ahead of it, then you can be resilient, and resiliency is going to be the name of the game from now on. So we'll do some more videos about resiliency. Stay safe. Thanks for watching. Don't forget to like and subscribe.